Welcome back for today's Booktube video. It's Magical Monday, so you know it's a fantasy novel. I'm doing a special book talk about the novel The Temple of Elemental Evil by Thomas M. Reid. But what you may not know is that this book is a part of a unique combination of media that has happened over the years. The Temple of Elemental Evil did not start with this novel. It started with Gary Gygax a long time ago. Gary Gygax is one of the creators of tabletop gaming, Dungeons and Dragons, and he wrote some gaming modules that people could use to play Dungeons and Dragons that were set in the village of Hommlet and the village of Nolb, and they built up to another product, another gaming module that was the Temple of Elemental Evil. It was a huge dungeon for players to take their characters through in tabletop gaming. It was a masterpiece. Really and truly, they created a video game using the third edition rules of Dungeons and Dragons that, in my opinion, certainly the best video game based off of tabletop gaming, because the gaming engine actually includes turn-based play with the actual rules of the game. For some reason, they keep making video games that are not turn-based play that are for tabletop gaming, and they don't use the actual rules for the character classes and all that, which I think is why a lot of the video games that are for Dungeons and Dragons and such end up getting a lot of complaints from fans and don't end up as successful as the companies want them to be, because they're not even using their own rules in their own system. It's ridiculous. But with the Temple of Elemental Evil they did, and it was a fantastic game. In fact, it's something that you can still download today and potentially play if you're not a Mac user. And there's a group of people who call themselves the Circle of Eight who fixed the bugs and gave software updates for the Temple of Elemental Evil, thus keeping it relevant and adding more content to it for years and years after the video game's release. So if you're going to play the game, I highly recommend you find their website, download their patches, and if you want the extended content to play the game. They don't charge any money for all of that, of course, mainly probably because they can't, but they deserve acknowledgement. And they call themselves the Circle of Eight because of the setting of Greyhawk on Earth, which was created by Gary Gygax. I've told you a lot of information, I know, and I haven't even gotten to the novel. The novel did come out, I believe, 2001. It is marked as being a part of the Greyhawk setting, and they really didn't release a lot of Greyhawk novels. Forgotten Realms kind of took over a lot of the D&D publishing. The Dragonlance books were very popular, the Forgotten Realms books were very popular, and unfortunately the Greyhawk setting kind of died over the years when it came to the mainstream audience. I think we're very lucky that we got this novel at all, but as I said yesterday with the James Doohan books, I'm not recommending this book based on the writing. This is not high caliber literary writing. This is more basic writing, but I recommend the book because I love the story of the Temple of Elemental Evil. I love the setting. I think the characters are fun, even though some people have complained about kind of the lack of character growth in the adventure story. Not only does the narrative follow our good guy hero team, but it's one of those books that will often switch point of view over to the bad guys. And so the lead bad guy, Hedrak, involved in some complicated factions and dealing with some difficulties with his minions and all of that. He's got his own point of view, and it is nice to have that switch back and forth. A lot of fantasy novels don't do that. It's exciting. Kind of like watching the later years of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, how they would often switch to the Dominion, and you would get to hear the bad guys strategizing and arguing over plans and dealing with the issues. Not only has this book come out, this was not the end of it. They released other role-playing products like Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil, and they've updated some of the adventure stuff over the years for the later versions, 4th edition, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. In honor of the Temple of Elemental Evil, they released a different Elemental Evil adventure set in the Forgotten Realms for 5th edition, the latest version of Dungeons and Dragons, and they also released a board game which they called The Temple of Elemental Evil, which paid, I think, really good homage to it. So if you're not really into Dungeons and Dragons and you don't want to learn the whole game, you could buy just the board game and play the board game itself, which is much simpler than learning all the rules for the more complicated tabletop gaming system. Have I bored you with all my nerdy details about the Temple of Elemental Evil without even really saying that much about the book? But I think the title says a lot. I don't want to give you too many spoilers. If you've read the old adventure module, it's fun to have the people of Hommlet, these ordinary villagers, and the special people who are more than just ordinary villagers, come to life in this novel. The author kind of takes some tricks by knowing the characters and the setting to where the book is not as long as you might expect it to be, to have an adventuring group actually go in and deal with everything. Like if you actually played Dungeons and Dragons and tried to clear out this entire dungeon of monsters and deal with all the drama in the towns and everything, the surrounding area, it could take you a long time, a lot of gaming sessions, which could be a whole lot of fun, by the way. But in the book, the characters don't do everything. They're not completionists as far as the adventure is concerned. There are some twists and turns that happen that allow the plot to speed up and move along and get to the end really faster. And that works, I think, for a novel, because you don't want to have to read a 5,000 page book, and you don't want to have them fight room after room of monsters in the dungeon. You know, that's not really how literature tends to work. Different playing the game or the video game as opposed to experiencing the story in the novel. Well, I've said plenty, I think, so I'll go ahead and end now. But if you ever have questions about Elemental Evil, the Temple of Elemental Evil, the Greyhawk Setting, the World of O-Earth, works by Gary Gygax, Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing, whatever, I actually could talk your ear off for hours and hours and hours probably, so feel free to ask me questions. Let me know your thoughts. Every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.